Hi, folks. I'm John Chrastka, Executive Director for EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute, and your host for the Library Advocacy and Funding Conference today. I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Meghan Davis from Bibliotheca. She's Vice President for Global Marketing there, and I wanted to chat with Meghan a little bit because she has a particular sort of global view on what's happening across library land based on the work that Bibliotheca does, the solutions they provide, and the support they give to libraries. EveryLibrary and EveryLibrary itself is a U.S.-based organization. We focus on U.S. elections, negotiations for public libraries and for school libraries, largely in the U.S., but our EveryLibrary Institute has partnerships across around the globe as well, particularly in the UK with CILIP and their Libraries Deliver project. And we work a bunch across North America and parts of Europe. But Meghan's reach and her current knowledge about the state of play in libraries across the globe is really why I wanted to have a chat with her. And I also want to mention that Bibliotheca is a diamond sponsor for this conference. Their support for our activities and the infrastructure of this conference has allowed us to bring in some of these top quality presentations that you folks have been seeing, and this networking opportunity that I hope has been rewarding for you. Meghan, I know COVID right now, you and I are the kind of people who used to get on an airplane all the time. I mean, I was out 30 weeks a year at some point or another. I know that you're out more than that. And everything's kind of shut down, but you have a global network of colleagues and customers. What are you hearing right now? Like what's going on out there across the world when it comes to not just services, and that's very important, not just how they're aligning their facilities, that's key, but what their policymakers and their funders are saying too. I'm really interested.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving us the opportunity to chat here. Always happy to support EveryLibrary. It's definitely a good partnership. And for us at Bibliotheca, it's really, hard to support every single library association that is out there. So we feel like in donating and partnering with EveryLibrary, our money and efforts are actually being spread out to some of the best places that they can. So thanks again for the opportunity.
We definitely try and put it to work. So yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think, it's been a very weird year. Obviously, I'm sure everybody is going to agree there. But we've got a huge global reach. And I think one of the things at Bibliotheca that we were able to do really early on was actually learn from some of the countries that were kind of shutting down earlier than we had here in the US. So really just, tapping into our colleagues and our libraries that we support in China and APAC, and as well as in, Germany. So we were definitely seeing things a lot quicker. Throughout all of the COVID response, I think it's been clear that libraries are really, it's key for them to learn from one another. And although there's a lot of downsides that come from people not being able to be in person and having that physical interaction, there's still a lot of good things that have come out of this in terms of like connecting people from different countries. And we've really been just able to do that from hosting webinars where we have our customers from, Germany and Denmark and the US, and we have one going on in China this week actually. But it's just one of those things where you can bring more people together virtually to learn from one another. But I mean, as far as what we're seeing, I think it's, it's very similar across the board of what you might see in the news of every country is at a different phase and everybody's kind of handling this a little bit differently. So it sometimes feels a little surreal to think how we're still kind of in the thick of like what's happening, and then seeing other people kind of starting to really get back to life is a little bit more normal. But we haven't yet seen libraries be 100% back to normal across Europe and in Germany and Denmark. Although they're more open than other libraries have been, they're not quite back to that same level of, the third space. It's really difficult when you're able to be open, but not really for the same services and the same reasons as you really had aspired to be before all of this happened. So, it's definitely interesting to see the different countries, based off of the levels of COVID and kind of where all the countries are handling it. But it translates very similarly to where the libraries are. The UK market is probably more similar to the US market in terms of, where libraries are at with their reopening, just starting to open some of their doors and having people come in and do some browse and borrow, but some of them are still only doing virtual or only doing holds pickup. So it's a little bit all over the place, just depending on where they're located, similar to what you see in the news. So.
When we work with library communities in the States, it's interesting because you cross the street, you're in a different, jurisdiction, and everybody says that their library is unique. And my colleague Patrick and I, we talk about how they're not necessarily unique, they're particular or peculiar, and you've had some great webinar sessions with colleagues, in the US and then across the world at the same time. Are you finding more commonality in the way that they're addressing this? Or is it really they are unique given the geographic or the particulars of how of when they are in this pandemic response and how they've been responding?
Yeah, in terms of the pandemic response, I would say like they're not super unique because they're all really truly like learning from each other of like what are some of the tactics that they can take to be able to respond. But I will say, like I've always said, oh yeah, everybody thinks that they're unique, but they truly are in the fact that their funding is always different, their communities are always different, the way that they need to influence people could be changing. You guys know that from based off of what's the political nature of the board, or just who they have to actually communicate with and what they have to go through from a policy standpoint. I would say that is where some libraries can be unique, and that's where I'm really starting to recognize the value of like libraries talking to like libraries. So we have a lot of sharing amongst libraries where I think everybody can always take something away. So they can listen to any library, whether or not they can relate to them 100%. They can take some sort of tidbit or information away that helps them, that gives them some knowledge that they didn't have before they did that. But equally, we've gotten some feedback of, a smaller library might watch a larger library on a webinar and say, well, that's really great, but I can't apply that to my library. So like there's a lot of great tips that people can take that can translate no matter what size or budget or community, but then equally there's a lot of power in the like libraries helping talk to like libraries, because it's a familiarity of what they think they can learn and actually action things from. So.
One of the reasons I appreciate and like working with Bibliotheca is in a similar way, Follett has a real strong focus on the school librarians as well as the school libraries. And all of Bibliotheca's solutions are not just focused on, 24/7 as an empty building, 24/7 or contactless as removed from staff. You have a really strong focus on making sure that the staff are deployed and supported, and that the ecosystem of libraries includes the librarian and the library worker, and I have to imagine that there's some examples of, that if we look at, say the APAC region or even parts of Europe as being our future here in the States, what are you seeing people do with lower levels of physical contact, but still intermediated by and still supported by staff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, some of this is more COVID related. Some is just longer term trends of what's changing in libraries. And I think the APAC region is always a little bit further ahead, particularly like in China, just like the technology of what they do there is really impressive. And they're always very, fast to adopt like cutting edge solutions. So I think we learn a lot from markets like China, or also in the Nordic region. We've got, those libraries and the people in the Nordic region tend to come up with really, technology advanced, interesting ideas and things that can move things forward, particularly for libraries. Mm-hmm. In terms of just, we're always focused on technology that helps libraries do their jobs better. And it's really not about trying to automate anything for the sake of automating it. It's really about why do we automate something, or why do we try to make a contactless solution? It's to make people feel more comfortable, to drive more usage, to make, we always have the end user in mind. So most of all of the technology that we focus on is it making it easier for the staff to do their job, which is down to any of the just transactional work that they have to do, that's not necessarily a huge value driven activity for the library and the community? Or is it making something really pleasant and easier for an actual user, whether they're in the library or outside of the library? So we're really focused on building this ecosystem of how do we get more library usage, and how do we actually free staff to do more of the programming and things that technology would never be able to replace? It can always enhance, but it could never replace the job that librarians can do, which is more of that programmatic work of understanding what their community needs and how to serve it.
Mm-hmm. You and I collaborated about 10 months ago, maybe, on a white paper about how do you talk to community leaders? How do you talk to stakeholders? How do you talk to funders, whether they're in your city council, your county government, or your own library board, about the idea that 24/7 contactless, the solutions around that staff efficiency pre-COVID, there's one kind of conversation. During COVID, there's a certain like rapid pivot that people need to make. And I'm looking a little bit further down the line too, God help us. But, when things get vaccinated, where one of the conversations I hear again and again and again is that we had 10 years of technology, 10 years of changes happen in 3 or 4 months. I mean, what are you seeing from that perspective of how the community is relating to the library with new technologies that do solve some of those current crisis problems, but also might be better infrastructure moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the thing is, we're often actually looking outside of libraries for trends and just really trying to say, what is it that, because the reality is the people who use libraries also engage in everyday life, which is where other trends are happening and where people are actually developing habits and patterns and behaviors. And I think through COVID, obviously, digital has been consumed more so than ever before. So that is a huge thing that we need to keep in mind as people are looking to libraries, is what does that mean from their digital aspects? What kind of content do they have? How are they serving that up? Is it easy to get? Is it easy for people to come back and consume? Is it available? I think also the fact that it's just people are prioritizing safety first, but then the next thing that they're prioritizing is convenience. So it's everything that they're trying to do. It needs to be convenient because everybody's life is 24/7 now. And in some various way that schedules don't always align. The 9 to 5 doesn't exist anymore. So it's really just trying to say, technology is going to play a big part in people's expectations of what they have, of just everyday life, of what they start to get used to. And that's where we're really taking that view and looking at that lens needs to very quickly be applied to what people are going to be experiencing at the library as well. And if they don't, then it's going to be more of either it's not convenient for them and they drop off quickly, or they don't even know about what it is that the library is offering, or they go and they haven't had an experience that changes their mind, which I think that's the key thing that libraries are really trying to do, is really change the perception of what a lot of people have in their heads about what a library is. I know you also traveling quite a bit. Every time I would be on a plane and talk to people about what it is that I do and say that I work in libraries, always I would get asked, libraries still exist? What do libraries do? Oh, you just check out books. And so you really have to kind of have the story over and over again about how libraries are really, this community hub, and they're just diving into all of these social aspects and things that their communities need, and how critical that they are for, young readers. And, it's just, that takes a lot to build down, to break down that stereotype of what libraries traditionally were. And I think that that's going to be where technology should really play a key pivotal part in what people's expectations are going to change when they use the library.
I think about what our counterparts in banking are doing right now, or in retail, or in grocery stores, or at a fitness club. And I also look at the way that delivery is being done. Everything from food to Amazon, of course, in that space. The expectations of the consumer, who are our patrons, also. You touched on that a moment ago. I'm interested in whether or not libraries can keep up with that. One of the things that I've done over the years is presented at different interlibrary loan conferences, because I'm a big interlibrary loan nerd. I think it's the coolest thing in libraries for two big reasons. One is it makes your stuff, it gets you more stuff, and the other is that it's a sharing approach to resources, whether your state's got a robust system or not, but the idea that there's a series of what's the word I'm looking for? Efficiencies that are being looked at by for-profit, companies. Chase Bank is not going to let their customer base disappear. The Safeway, Kroger is not going to let their customers disappear. Amazon certainly is grabbing market share right now. What do you think libraries have to be doing to learn from that? And then my second question, as a follow-up, is going to be, how do we get it funded?
I think they come to you for some of that funding. No.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
But you don't want me designing a 24/7 open plus solution for anybody. That's you. Let me ask you first.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, that's exactly what our solutions are designed to do, is to just help open access to libraries, whether or not that's the physical library, which is our Open Plus solution, or their digital collection. So we also have Cloud Library. You were just talking about your love of interlibrary loan. It's essentially, we can link collections within states that make it so that they're essentially lending out their digital items to other users of different libraries. And it's one of the best ways to actually be able to exponentially grow your digital collection, by sharing your titles. But we're definitely trying to make sure that everything is focused around that convenience aspect. And like, is it going to be something that drives ease of use? People can get to it. In terms of like funding, I mean, we're really looking at, ways that we can make those barriers, those capital expenses, a lot less of a hurdle. If you think about more of, people would be, having a copy machine that they just pay a monthly fee for, and that's something that they continually do, and they always get a new copier. So we're really just, Bibliotheca is taking hardware, software, and content and pulling all of that together in one ecosystem, and really just trying to work with libraries on, how do we make that affordable? How do we make that be something that is not something that they can't, aspire to have in any size library with any budget? We have different levels, and, just a lot of ways that we can make technology affordable for libraries. We just need to talk to libraries about, different methods that they would be able to pay for that. So
let me go back one half step here, because I'm trying to picture, like I said, you don't want me being the person designing, one of these solutions, and you've done several great webinars over the last couple of months, again, bringing people in from the US and then from someplace else. What's the coolest one, if I can ask? Because, I think about like bricks and mortar, of course, being difficult right now. I got my kids chomping at the bit, to get back in, and we would like to keep their schoolwork, their reading for enjoyment fresh. Like, who's doing something that is exemplary?
So this wasn't really on a webinar. I think Munich Public Library in Germany has got some really interesting things going on, where they're combining our Open Plus solution, so extended access, with our transformative library solution, which is really more like digital communication. So whenever you come into the space, it can, technology, it will know whether or not staff is in the building or not in the building, changes what communication they might get at different times based on what people might need. So if an example of that would be, staff isn't there and they're just coming in to pick up holds, or they want to be in the space for Wi-Fi, they want to meet with friends or groups that they're part of, they might have messages on the screen that are more of like, the Wi-Fi access code is this, bathrooms are in the back, something more directional, something more like basic of just like, here's a lot of the key questions that we would get to a staff member at a desk. But then also promoting things of like, what other programs would they might be interested in. The other interesting stuff that we're doing, so there's a branch of the Munich Public Library that is just really cool, because it's just, they have all of our solutions, but when you go in, it's just that transformative library kind of brings things to life. One of the things that also I have loved is in Denmark, that it's very popular that they have book trailers. So really? The first time that I went into one library, and on our transformative screens, they were promoting book trailers. And I was looking at this and I thought, is this a movie that has been made out of a book? Is that why I'm seeing this trailer? And they all looked at me very perplexed, because this is very common for them. And they were like, no, they're book trailers. And, it's like a video, like a movie trailer, but just for a book that has not been into a movie yet. So it's just promoting that book.
Yeah, they all like begin in a time.
No, there's no talking. It's just very much just like scenes. It's very like visual. It catches your attention, and it just kind of like, you can get a sense of like, is this going to be a mystery theme? Is this going to be, kind of more of a drama that I might be interested in? But it really is like a different way of capturing attention. And that's where we really see transformative library being, how do we capture attention and get recognition, because there's so much stuff that people are competing with, especially in a digital space. There's so many messages getting, thrown around, that you really have to come up with different ways that capture people's attention. But I would say like, that's one of the libraries I've seen that has some really interesting things. With transformative library, we can also take that same digital signage and apply it to the kiosks that you have. So it's really applying, you've got screens all throughout your library. Well, let's use them if they're not being used for a self-checkout. So we're really trying to kind of create that ecosystem that really is more holistic, and the staff has one place that they can manage things and be able to push it out to various locations. So
from the funder's perspective, whether it's a donor who might want to add some capacity to a library, try something new, elected officials, the board, the voters, having to capitalize a new idea. We always talk about two frames at EveryLibrary for communications, two broad frames. There's a lot of details, but fundamentally it's about either extending your success or fixing some failure. And those two frames around extending success and fixing failure, in terms of positioning solutions that are not just short-term, not just Band-Aids, but are potentially going to be useful after this whole thing is over. I got to imagine that the fixing failure one, let's Band-Aid, let's bring it in, let's prototype it. But the extending success part, every single library that I know has got real core competencies, and if they could just do it at a little bit better scale. How do you position a technology purchase as bibliotheca, as an aid? How do you coach your libraries to talk to their voters, their elected officials, or their funders too around that?
Yeah, that's something that, like when the CARES Grant Act, came out, we purposefully helped libraries understand how to talk about how this solution actually helps with what they're trying to achieve right now. And so, we work very closely with our libraries to make sure that they know the value of what they're investing in. I know everything that we offer at Bibliotheca does not have like a shelf life of like the next few months, like through
Right.
COVID, because everything was already developments that we had. We tweaked them slightly. So for Open Plus, we created two new features that were basically Open Plus Count is a 3D camera that can count the number of people that are coming into the space. And then we utilized and had it talk to our transformative library solution. So utilize those screens to say, this is, the building is at capacity, or it's near capacity, or it's nowhere near capacity. So you can feel safe to come in here. But that's because we saw people need to have some signs of change whenever, with all of this going on, people feel very psychologically unsafe about being places that they felt very safe being before. But that was like a very quick little pivot that we could use, but it's using all of the same technology that I just talked about. Transformative library is going to be more of a displaying, what are some things that you're trying to capture interest, you're trying to market your services. That same camera, it's counting people, but equally it's used for traffic patterns in the future of how are people using your space. If you think that you've designed your space well and you're trying to get people to a certain area of the library, is it working? It's a way for you to be able to have data. So none of those pieces of technology are a waste of money. Like there's value in what that brings to the library in the long term. Same with our remote locker solution. It's bringing books out to new locations where you couldn't afford to have a physical branch, but you want to increase service. We were on a webinar with an architect from IFDU in the UK out of London, and he brought up the concept of the 15-minute neighborhood, that everything that you need should be within 15 minutes of getting from your house.
That's
and so you have to really, yeah, well, even driving distance, but I mean, even I live in a very rural area in Vermont. It was very important to me that I was 10 minutes away from a grocery store when we moved. So that just goes to show that, if libraries want to play a key part in people's everyday lives, they have to be convenient. They have to be within a very attainable, way that people can actually, access their services. So,
I've been thinking a lot about the news coverage I've seen about folks leaving big cities and moving out, into rural places. You were an early adopter, of course, Meghan. I'm suburban Chicago myself. We're actually hosting the conference, my colleague Patrick and I, from outside of Annapolis. I think about my other colleague Mike and how he's in Brooklyn. You look around and it's a different setting, but that 15-minute idea is really kind of fascinating. And I have to think that as people are leaving cities or thinking about leaving cities, or when you invest in your new hometown, or folks who've always been in those more rural or more ex-urban settings, there's going to be a demand coming out of COVID for better amenities. And the expectations that folks have of the library that they left behind are going to set their expectation. I'm sorry, their experience of what they left behind is going to set their expectations when they come into a new place. And I got to imagine that there's going to be pressure on library leaders to bring in solutions that solve that 15-minute problem, but even at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good, just to paint a picture of, for those that are listening or don't know me or where I live in the middle of Vermont. And it's very rural where I live. I love it. Fast internet, but my local library I can get to in 5 minutes, but the hours are awful. And so I can't personally get to my library very often. So if my library either had Open Plus so that I could get into it more convenient hours, not saying 24 hours a day, but I'm saying, could I get into it at 6 or 7 in the morning before I start getting into work? Or can I get into it at 7 or 8 at night, on the way back when people get back into commuting? Those are traditional times where people want to have access. That's one way that we're saying we would be able to provide access. But alternatively, it could be that my library had a remote locker where I could get my holds, but they partner with the local convenience store that is open longer hours. And so the library is not having to be open as long, but it has a presence in some form or factor. And it creates partnerships and awareness that way. So neither of those scenarios exist, which I'm very sad about, because obviously it makes it hard for me to use my local library with right. the hours that it's actually open. But I think that that's a really good point, that as people are moving around, but it's not necessarily the expectations of the library that they're leaving behind. I think it's just the expectations of life and around them. That's what's going to drive what libraries have to do, and they have to change, because it's just, people are going to get used to these new experiences that they're having. You look at the speed of innovation around you of restaurants and grocery stores and things of that, libraries are going to really have to compete with that, because they can't change perceptions if they don't use that as kind of a guiding post. And, they're really in the business of serving people. So obviously that's a better and bigger mission, is it's not just about convenience. It's not just about books. It is about the mission that libraries serve and the social needs that they're helping with. But equally, they have to get funding. They have to prove themselves. And that comes from a wide variety of people. And I think sometimes the people that they think, technology is really, it's not replacing staff, but sometimes it's talking to a different type of user. And that might be the type of user that you want to be investing more in the library.
Yeah, everybody wants to have that extend your success, scale up what you're doing conversation. But a lot of the funding needs are to fill in gaps, fix holes, prevent failures, And I look at smart libraries, and investments by smart library leaders as being something that's going to endure past the pandemic, But the pandemic has revealed so many inequities. And that frank conversation about fixing failure has to, in this day and age, not just for convenience, but for success of the deliverability, has to have a real honest look at where gaps are, where failure is happening, where failure could happen, and then finding a good partner to put those solutions together. I mean, I know that it's a hard conversation to have around taxes. It's a hard conversation for folks to have around new funding. And yet there's a boldness that I think will make libraries come out stronger at the other end. I mean, you're already starting to see it over in the APAC regions as they're a little ahead of us.
Is there boldness coming out? Is that your question?
Yeah. I mean, is there, yeah. I'm hoping that there's a boldness. Let me say it like that. Are you starting to see that, for libraries saying, as we come out of this thing, we're going to have a better delivery, we're going to have a better experience, we're going to have a better, library in the process? Or is it still too soon in the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't know that I would describe it that way. Maybe that's what we want it to be, but I think I would describe it more of there's a little bit of, there's a lot of creativity and just they're coming up with new ideas of ways to deliver service in different ways. I would say Australia's got some interesting concepts and ideas, like how they quickly pivoted to doing more delivery of books to elderly people. And so again, back to that convenience factor. I mean, everything's going to be driven by, is this going to be something that can actually be convenient for people to use? But I don't know that I've yet seen a lot of boldness in how people are going to go out and get funding. I think, you had kind of asked what were some of the things that I felt was, that my concerns were for the industry. And maybe it is a little bit of that lack of boldness, because I think there's definitely key, like, you know, a lot of larger systems are very innovative directors and innovative leadership teams. So it's not to say that it doesn't exist and it's not out there. I've definitely seen it. I think that, you know, libraries probably need to take a little bit of that mindset of being a bit of a business, being in the business of helping people, but being in a business of promoting themselves, influencing others, marketing the services that they have, which is why I love everything about the conference that you've put together and the different keynotes and people that you've brought in. I know it was, who was I watching? Her name is Ashley Sang. So if anybody's on this that hasn't watched her session, it's all on personas and just understanding, and libraries can really use that as what's the persona of who they're trying to influence and who they need to truly go out and get more funding from, and really kind of identifying that. Because I think sometimes libraries are really focused on who they serve and who they can help, but they can't serve and help as much if they can't influence up and be able to get more funding. So I think that's so yeah, I guess I'm not seeing a ton of boldness out there yet. I think in patches you might see it in a couple of different, you know, depends on the people. I would say it comes down to the people. I wouldn't say it comes down to an actual country. It would come down to the leader of a library and how passionate they are about change and how kind of they're digging in and really going to try to make it. So
I think that's a frank answer, and I appreciate that. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with you today. I also know, and I'm not going to speak for you here, but I also know that you're looking to talk to people who've got that little fire in them about this. I know that here at EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute, we're certainly looking to stand alongside people as they're trying to innovate, to extend their success and really to fix those failures. So, Meghan, it's been really great talking with you today. I appreciate our time. Any parting words of wisdom or thoughts?
I think, just find something that inspires you to go ask for more money and be able to kind of advocate for your library more, because I think libraries are essential. I think the things that they do cannot be replaced by anybody else or any other organization that are out there. So I definitely say, like, if you find that fire, keep spreading that fire for other people as well. Because I think people definitely can encourage others to do similar things. So I hope we can continue to do that in the future together.
Absolutely. Meghan, I really appreciate Bibliotheca and their partnership with us as an organization, but I truly appreciate the work that the support that Bibliotheca has given to help us work through this conference. If folks want to visit during the conference, in the vendor tab, it's under Bibliotheca. Otherwise, it's bibliotheca.com. Meghan, thank you for this conversation today. I want to stop the recording and then invite you to hang out for a few minutes for a little bit of chat too, okay?
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, folks. Good to be with you today.
Bye.
Bye.